This reading comes from an organization called menliving.org. They have a blog, and several of the members who try to live a healthy, intentional, and connected life offered these reflections on fatherhood. A few excerpts. Frank Nago says, "I'll be honest, fatherhood is way harder than I imagined it to be. However, when I'm able to get present and pay attention, little treasures abound. Sometimes I get too caught up, wanting to impart wisdom on them, provide some life lesson that they can take and use. But really, the amount of wisdom they already have intuitively astounds me. So fatherhood is about being there when they need me." And Craig Dooley writes, "To me, fatherhood means both the greatest privilege and the most profound responsibility I could ever have imagined. I'm never off duty, emotionally, spiritually, or physically. It's an opportunity to love, nurture, and support and guide a young life to become the greatest version of herself, and most importantly, allow her to be what she is supposed to be, what she wants, rather than any expectation I might have about her. In so many ways, fatherhood has been the greatest source of my own growth and maturity as a man, especially as a father to my daughters, for whom I am eternally grateful."
First of all, I just wanted to invite you after the coffee time to come back for reflection. There's a lot more opportunity there for kind of some of those more in-depth conversations or questions that you might have. A lot of this is fairly surface level, but when you're traveling for 6 months to 20 different countries, it's hard to fit it all into 12 minutes. So, what is the first thing that comes to mind when you think of the word freedom? For me, as a high school social studies teacher at Durango High School, our annual staff t-shirt for this past school year had a saying on the back that said, "Be curious, not judgmental." The word freedom, however, triggers me politically. And when thinking about that quote on my t-shirt, I lean towards judgment, about how a particular political philosophy has apprehended this word for the sake of the individual freedoms that, in my view, lean towards greed and selfishness. With that said, in the spirit of curiosity instead of judgment, I have begun to harness the quote in order to reframe my thoughts towards being curious about why is it that we aren't more open to freedom in other ways as well. So when Reverend Jamie and Worship Associate Mary Ocken told me that June's theme is freedom, I initially had a hard time associating this word with my family's 6-month world adventure as part of my sabbatical from January to July of 2024. But after closer inspection and some helpful consultation with Reverend Jamie and Mary, we were able to come up with a whole host of ways that our adventure is associated with freedom. For those of you that have seen the recent Disney Pixar classic Luca, you might follow me when I say that the character Alberto represents what I want freedom to represent. A sea monster in a human world, he harnesses his inner risk-taker to succeed against the odds. Even better, he convinces the main character, Luca, also a sea monster, to tell his inner self-doubter, "Silencio Bruno," and he goes for it. Freedom. Life, after all, is all about failure. As long as we give it the old college try, then we can always reflect on our failures to be better the next time. The first time I applied for the sabbatical, I wasn't accepted. Essentially, I had failed. But I made my second proposal better based on the feedback that I was given, and the superintendent, Dr. Karen Chester, accepted the sabbatical the second time. When I was accepted for the sabbatical, I had the freedom to seek the advice from a few trusted confidants who had done this type of a trip already, namely my brother, who had purchased an around-the-world plane ticket in his mid-20s with his eventual wife, my sister-in-law, and a couple of friends. I was also fortunate to host a digital nomad couch surfer named Ted, who ended up being super valuable for resources related to logistics throughout the entire trip. But as opposed to the Silencio Bruno mentality of the character Alberto, I also had to keep in mind that Crystal and I weren't in our mid-20s, and we wouldn't be traveling alone. Our two daughters, Iris, age 10 at the time, and Talise, age 7 at the time, would be joining us. And we had to make sure that they not only stayed safe throughout the trip, but would actually learn and remember a thing or two. Crystal and I quickly decided that Iris and Talise would learn and remember the most by keeping a journal of their travels. Talise, our youngest, decided to keep a graphic journal. There's a couple samples from it. Iris decided to start her own YouTube page, which she called Worldwide Vibes. Make sure to like and subscribe. Just the opportunity to embark on an adventure like this is a freedom that I certainly don't take for granted. The Durango Education Association, the local educators union, includes the sabbatical in our school district's master agreement. But just because it's in the master agreement doesn't mean that the superintendent has to say yes. And I'm really grateful for Dr. Karen Chesser's forward-thinking thoughtfulness and the importance that she places on building global connections with our students. After collaborating with the administrative team with Durango 9R, I was tasked with creating 4 projects, one for each grade strand, so that students would hopefully have the freedom to empathize with our experience. Crystal had an equally supportive boss from Backcountry Experience in Ben Rokas, who permitted Crystal to take a 6-month leave of absence and keep her job when she returned. During our adventure, 4 main freedoms stand out that really transformed us during the adventure. Freedom number 1. Yes, we were carrying our entire life possession with us for 6 months straight. And the freedom to choose what was in our bags and what we should mail home was really big. Thanks to my mom, by the way, for receiving all of our shipments. And in carrying a small rollback suitcase as our main possession, we got really good at condensing our lives into what we really needed into this limited amount of space, and that is a skill that I truly did learn from Crystal. Freedom number 2. Yes, it was our responsibility to take a limited amount of time and make the most of it. After all, 6 months goes by very quickly when visiting 20 countries. And each day we had the freedom to do what we thought would be the most impactful. Impactful for my sabbatical project, impactful for the girls' learning, and just most impactful and memorable for us as a family. Instead of answering the question, what was your favorite country, which we get a lot, I like to explain the most impactful themes of learning that we encountered, including religion, animals, and colonialism. With religion, we were able to actually experience Sikhism, Hinduism, Islam, and Buddhism for the first time. This included staying with an amazing Sikh family through couchsurfing in Amritsar, India, trekking to Holy Lake in Nepal, like Talise had mentioned, visiting mosques in Malaysia and Turkey, and participating in a 30-hour Buddhist temple stay outside of Seoul, South Korea. With animals, we were so lucky to have experienced a variety of both wild and domestic animals. From sea turtles hatching in Australia to an elusive cheetah in Kruger National Park in South Africa, as well as a whole host of other animals that we got to experience. For colonialism, not only were we able to unfortunately witness the influence of colonization on the indigenous population in many of the countries that we were at, we also had the opportunity to visit the National Museum of England in London, where many of the stolen colonial relics, including the Rosetta Stone, were on display. Freedom number 3. No, there really was, never a time that we were more than 10 feet apart from each other. For 6 months straight. The time this was most sardine-like was when we graciously accepted a couch surfing spot in a South Korean doctor's office with 1 futon and 1 small couch as the sleeping quarters for the 4 of us. And we learned how to have the freedom to advocate for ourselves when we needed alone time, and really gained an understanding of not only the individual components of our family, but our overall values as a whole. For example, we tried to delegate as much power as possible to our daughters, including where to eat, what to buy at the grocery store, and where to stay. Talise, our youngest, was my main helper when putting together a set of artifacts to represent each region that we visited for my third grade curriculum project. And Iris was the finance manager. So you can see that spreadsheet there. She collected receipts and let us know how we were managing financially throughout the trip. In addition, in Sydney, I quickly learned about rule number 3. From the get-go, we had told the girls about rules number 1 and number 2. Be safe and have fun. But after I was absolutely certain that we could actually go inside the Sydney Opera House, I asked the security guard, who promptly said, "I think you need to listen to your wife." Because he had overheard the conversation where I was trying to convince him that it was all okay. So then rule number 3 was born, which is, mommy is usually right. Freedom number 4. Yes, we were constantly trying to ensure that we knew where we would be staying the next night. With that said, we had the absolute freedom to stay at some really unique and amazing accommodations, and with some couch surfing families, like Crystal talked about, who are now lifelong friends. All of our couch surfing hosts really went out of their way to make sure we had the ultimate experience in their homes and towns. In addition, we had the freedom to stay inside a cave in Cappadocia, Turkey, a rest camp in the middle of Kruger National Park in South Africa, on the Reunification Express train in Vietnam in a 6-bunk, hard sleeper cabin, and there was 2 additional people in there besides us, and at a backpacker lodge on the South Island of New Zealand that included soup for dinner and pancakes for breakfast. Now that we've been back at it for the past school year, we have taken the freedom to readjust our lives in accordance with a couple of major takeaways from the trip. First, at no other place during our journey are people as busy as they are here in the USA. I asked our amazing couchsurfing host, Gurman in Amritsar, India, if he had ever considered moving to the USA to be with some of his relatives that he had said had already migrated here. Absolutely not, Gurman said without hesitating. He continued and he said, "I have everything that I need here, and it's way too busy out there." Even in Durango, where the pace is quite a bit more easygoing than Denver and other cities in the U.S., for some reason it's embedded in our DNA. We got to load up our schedules as much as possible. But going from a 100% full-time position as a teacher down to an 80% was a first step for me, and Crystal was able to return to a less stressful role at her job. In addition, we've reflected on the environmental impact from our journey and how we can strive to reduce our footprint going forward. According to Visual Capitalist, the average CO2 emission for a typical around-the-world traveler is approximately 20 tons. To put this in perspective, the average American emits an average of 16 tons per year compared to 4 tons for the average world citizen. So while a trip like this had a major carbon imprint, our hope is that we can use this experience to align ourselves more with the footprint of a world citizen instead of a U.S. citizen, which would essentially save 12 tons of carbon per year. Furthermore, we were exposed to various situations that left a mental impact for us that helped to motivate us to be better environmentally. During our hike in the Himalayas, while including a panorama of 6,000-meter peaks, this was also met with an abundance of litter along the trail. This prompted a variety of discussions as a family about the impact of littering, microplastics in our food supply, and how to reduce littering in the future. Most of the countries that we visited were much more thoughtful in energy conservation. This included things like plug switches that turned off, as well as never keeping the air conditioning units turned on at all if there was nobody in the house. What have I learned about myself as a father? Well, one important takeaway I learned from our couchsurfing host in Bega, Australia. They said the goal of being a good parent is that they can be 100% self-sufficient by the time they turn 18. And they claim that it's our job as parents to be able to do the math as they get closer to adulthood to ensure that, for example, by the time that they turn 9, that they're already halfway ready to be self-sufficient. And et cetera, with 4.5, 25%. While it's certainly a simplistic way of thinking about parenting, the point that I took away is that while we need to be there to show them the way, we also need to let them make mistakes and learn from them. Overall, this experience not only reaffirmed my emphasis on the risk-taking, fail-forward mentality that Crystal and I try to perpetuate to our daughters and to my students as a teacher, but it also opened up our eyes to the beauty and diversity of our amazing world. I couldn't be more grateful to all of those who helped make this experience happen, and look forward to living the lessons that we've learned and continuing to reestablish our roots here in Durango. Thank you.